You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 15th of July 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
Take a look at what happened.
We'll have reaction to the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. Then we'll cross to Jerusalem for the latest news of the Israel-Gaza conflict. We'll have an in-depth look at Rwanda, where, going by the record of his previous 3 terms, Paul Kagame is expected to announce he's won almost 100% of the vote in the country today. We'll have analysis of Japan's new white paper on defence, have a flick through the papers, and get a hit of urbanism and design news from Switzerland. Plus,
I can only talk about the experiences I've had because this is the first time I've done a film. This film is important for us for many reasons. It made me grow and learn about things I truly didn't know before.
Our correspondent has been chatting to performers on the red carpet at Italy's version of the Golden Globes. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. Just after 6 p.m. on Saturday, the former President of the United States and presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump took to the stage to address a campaign rally in Butler, a city about 30 miles north of Pittsburgh. Less than 10 minutes later, multiple shots were fired towards the stage. Trump grabbed his ear and then dropped to the ground. He was immediately surrounded by Secret Service officers. Instructing them to wait as they tried to escort him off the stage, Trump clenched his fist, posing for photographs against the stars and stripes behind him, his face streaked with blood. Leaving to choruses of USA, USA from his fans in the stadium, Trump was checked at a medical facility. He later issued a statement on his social media platform, thanking law enforcement officials for their quick action after he was shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of his right ear. He also said God alone prevented the unthinkable from happening and called on Americans to remain resilient and show our true character. The shooter, a 20-year-old called Thomas Matthew Crooks, was killed at the scene, or neutralised, as the FBI like to put it. 1 spectator died and 2 more were critically injured. Our North America editor, Chris Lord, is on the line. Chris, aside from the initial shock, how has this been covered in the US? Has there been a partisan attitude from the media, or have the calls for unity landed?
I think the main thing that you hear and read across the media today and across Sunday's media in the US has been an attempt to capture this mood and feeling of a nation exhausted. I think many people went to bed on Saturday night after that attempted assassination, frightened, fearful, worried about what kind of precedent this sets for the beginning of this, really the sort of very beginning, if you like, of the proper campaign, where as we go now into the Republican National Convention on Monday, that really kicks things off in a way. And I think lots of people spent that night fearful about what this means. So the media really tries to capture that, I think, a little bit to sort of stay above the fray of what is really roiling on social media, which is a minefield of conspiracy theories. But what you do find, I think, that's across the board is this narrative emerging of concern about the Secret Service, concern about the security response and if you like, or rather the sort of preparedness on the part of the security services for what happened on Saturday evening, how the shooter was able to get as close as he did. And of course, there are now congressional Republicans calling for an inquiry into the Secret Service. and some asking as well very vocally whether there was a dereliction of duty in what they did. But I think when the media fundamentally, the narrative that is coming across mostly is, there are huge calls for unity, huge calls to, as President Biden did this evening in the Oval Office, dial the temperature down. But I think for a lot of Americans, that's just not the case. People are worried, fearful, and in many cases quite angry.
Now, Trump insisted that the Secret Service wait before taking him off stage. He then stood, his fist raised in the air with his bloodied face, flag flying behind him. This image was flashed around the world. One couldn't buy PR like that. What will that image mean for the election?
I think that image will come to define this election. I think it will be an extremely motivating factor for those people who maybe felt unsure about Donald Trump. And I think when we go into the Republican National Convention this week, what you will find there is some of those who were very cautious about the nominee, the candidate for their party, will rally around him now in the days ahead. And he's on his way, or he's been on his way on Sunday evening to Wisconsin to appear there with a big bandage over his ear. And the New York Post managed to actually get an interview with him. And he's clearly not lost his sense of humor slightly as well, because even he described it as being the most iconic photograph he's ever seen. He said, usually you have to die to get such an iconic picture. Nevertheless, it will galvanize a lot of people who will, I think the image of him pumping his fist and shouting, fight, 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 really cuts through. So it's a moment in a way, I think, where when you have on the other side of things and the Biden campaign struggling to know who's going to be the person actually leading this campaign, despite what President Biden wants to keep battling on through November, all those concerns. And then meanwhile, you have now this very re-energized campaign, and that photograph is going to be on T-shirts. And as I was just looking, tattoos are already being made of that very moment on people's body parts. So it's an iconic thing that will come to define this election.
Thank you, Chris. I trust you're not going to get inked yourself. I'm going to bring in Nick Bryant now, who's the author of Forever War, America's Unending Conflict with Itself, and a former BBC correspondent in both Washington and New York. Nick, your book tells the story of how America's extreme polarization is 250 years in the making. You write that division, mistrust and misinformation are now the country's defining characteristics. The storming of the Capitol, the prosecution of Trump, battles over gun rights, abortion, etc. They all raise the spectre of further political violence and even the possibility of a second civil war. Well, is that where we are now? I mean, Trump's called for unity, but were the shots fired by crooks perhaps the opening salvo of the next US internecine conflict?
Well, I certainly hope not. And America has an awful lot of muscle memory when it comes to its extreme polarization. As I say in the book, it's 250 years in the making. Of course, there was that rupture in the middle of the 19th century that led to a civil war in which tens of thousands of Americans lost their lives fighting their fellow Americans. I don't think we're at that point now. It's a different situation. There isn't the same geographic divide. There isn't the single issue divide. We talk about the red and the blue states, but a lot of red states have a lot of blue blobs in them, like Texas, with cities like Dallas and Houston. So it is different, but division has always been America's default. That goes back to the founding days of the American Republic. Political violence has been a continual thread of the country's history. And I think that's what makes what happened on Saturday shocking but unsurprising in many ways. 4 American presidents have lost their lives as a result of political violence. Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, John F. Kennedy. So many other presidents have been targeted in assassination attempts. FDR, Harry Truman, Theodore Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, of course. So what we saw on Saturday wasn't a watershed moment for America. It was a continuum. It's a continuation of a story that goes back 250 years.
When Trump posed for that iconic photograph, he was saying, fight, fight, fight. And interestingly, those were the words he used just before his supporters stormed the Capitol on the 6th of January. Is there some conclusion to be drawn from that?
Well, violence has always been central to his political approach and his political credo, and it also explains much of his political appeal. I mean, when he first emerged in 2015 and was telling his supporters at rallies to beat the crap out of people and stuff like this, that was one of the reasons why he established such a sort of visceral connection with so many people who became the MAGA faithful over the years. He has escalated the political rhetoric in America. It's slightly ironic now to hear Republicans blaming the Democrats for a rhetoric that has led to this kind of attack. I mean, that was very much Donald Trump's rhetoric, and it has been for many years now. But that shot is instantly iconic. As Chris was saying, it is going to rally the Republican Party. History shows that America tends to like strong presidents, even strongman presidents. They tend to punish the weak and the frail. And that's what this election looks like at the moment. And that's how it will increasingly be framed. Donald Trump, who survived an assassination attempt and then showed his sort of machismo by shouting, fight, 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 and a deeply divided Democratic Party at the moment with an elderly candidate who does look rather weak and rather frail.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Now, today sees the start of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Reporter Simon Marks sent us this report from the event to give us a sense of just how much impact the attack on Donald Trump has had amongst his party.
Donald Trump flew into this city early on Sunday evening, saying that he had thought about delaying his arrival here after Saturday's attempted assassination, but had concluded that he could not allow a man he called a potential assassin to force a change in his plans. Republican delegates to the convention have arrived to discover the centre of this city is a virtual fortress, though after a review of security arrangements ordered by President Biden in the wake of Saturday's attack, the Secret Service says it will not be extending the security perimeter beyond the current setup. Donald Trump anticipates getting a hero's welcome when he first appears before convention attendees, and that is expected to take place on Monday, when he may also reveal the identity of his running mate. Make of it what you will, but there are multiple reports that Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio is now receiving Secret Service protection, perhaps the clearest indication yet that he is the frontrunner to join Trump on the ticket. There's also a sense here that an even greater display of Republican enthusiasm for Trump and unity around his candidacy will be on display, with the chatter here filled with talk of the former president's bravery as he came under literal fire on Saturday. I'm Simon Marks for Monocle Radio at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee.
Many thanks to Simon. This is The Globalist. On Saturday, the Palestinian Health Authority said 90 people were killed and hundreds more injured in an Israeli attack. Israeli forces say the Hamas military chief, Mohammed Diaf, the mastermind of the 7th of October attack, was the target of the strike in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. Well, I'm joined now by Hannah McCarthy, who's a journalist in Jerusalem. Good morning to you, Hannah. Many thanks for coming on the show. Is there any clarity on whether or not Diaf was actually killed?
There is still not confirmation that Mohammed Diaf has been killed. The Israeli authorities have said that his deputy, Rafa Salama, who was the commander of the Hamas's Khan Yunis brigade, was killed. But they have not yet issued a statement confirming that Diaf has actually been killed. He's experienced several assassination attempts by Israeli forces before. And in one case, it was 6 months before they were able to confirm that he had not, in fact, been killed. So there could be a considerable period of uncertainty about whether or not he has survived. Hamas have said he is untouched, but it's, of course, in their interest to say that.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about him and if his death would represent a significant victory for Israel.
So Mohammed Diaf, he was born in Khan Yunis in around 1965. He's one of the long-term military leaders within Hamas. He's trained as a bomb maker. He is responsible for several bomb attacks inside Israel, and he's viewed as one of the architects of the 7th of October. So he is a high-value military target for those who use the term. And again, for anyone who's kind of wondering, what is an acceptable civilian casualty to have when you strike at someone of his value militarily, I think it's worth even looking at, the assassination attempt on Osama bin Laden in 2011. There, the US forces decided that they wouldn't bomb the town Abbottabad in Pakistan, where he was located. They sent in a team of commandos, and as well as Osama bin Laden, 3 people were killed. So the level of civilian casualties that are being incurred in these assassination attempts are extremely high. And they're the kind of civilian casualties that would just not be acceptable if it was, for example, a US military operation.
How does Israel justify killing 90 people in the pursuit of one man?
Well, first of all, they say that the breakdown is not clear about combatants versus civilians. What we're hearing from those on the ground is that half of those killed were women and children. And again, their view is that it's a high-value military target. And since the 7th of October, the level of civilian casualties that have been incurred while targeting not even just Hamas commanders, even lower level Hamas figures, has been extraordinarily high. And again, it's the kind of calculation that would not be acceptable for many other major militaries at the moment. Even the US brought in new guidelines just in December that was basically outlining when it would be acceptable to incur civilian casualties, and they've reduced what is acceptable following reviews of their approaches in Afghanistan and Iraq, where high numbers of civilian casualties were incurred, which ultimately they believe went against their interests in the region, put the population against them, and again just have not been ultimately helpful for their long-term purposes.
Now, there's been another round of ceasefire talks moderated by US, Egyptian and Qatari mediators. We gather these have once again broken down, but was anything achieved during the meetings? Again,
it's the same story that we've seen recurring throughout these negotiations, and it's clear that there has not yet been a moment where both sides truly want to achieve this deal. Netanyahu has been making public statements that he will not back down on any of his points. This is obviously not what negotiators want to hear before they go into rounds of negotiations. They want to have some leeway. They want to be able to reassure Hamas that a deal can be made. Broadly speaking, politically, Netanyahu is relying on the right-wing political establishment in his cabinet who are opposed to a ceasefire deal. If they resign, elections will be triggered. So Netanyahu doesn't have a personal political interest in coming to a ceasefire deal. And I would say that, again, with events happening in the US, with the rallying behind Trump following the assassination attempt on him, many would say, they're looking at, why would they kind of make a deal if they could have Trump in office soon. So the conditions to push Netanyahu towards a ceasefire deal just don't seem to be here at the moment.
What would a Trump presidency mean for Israel?
I think they broadly see it as within their interests in terms of continuing operations in Gaza. At the same time, Trump was not always a reliable partner. He's made lots of comments on, foreign aid and discontinuing it, which would be very worrying to the Israeli establishment. And he also criticised Israeli leaders for their approach on the 7th of October. So, broadly speaking, the right-wing elements of the Israeli political establishment view Trump as a advantageous outcome rather than Biden. But again, he's not necessarily a reliable partner. And again, it will be there will be a lot of uncertainty, if he comes to power about what his approach will be in Israel.
So, Hannah, what is the situation now with these talks, with ceasefire talks? Will they be back on again this week?
They are expected to continue this week. The Israeli officials have said they will continue, and Hamas officials have said, while there was an early statement that this assassination attempt will make the negotiations more difficult. The Hamas political office said that the negotiations were continuing. So it's hard to see exactly, what the immediate impact of the assassination attempt is on the negotiations. It seems that they are ongoing, but at the same time, are the conditions there where it's likely for there to be a breakthrough? It's not clear yet.
Hannah McCarthy in Jerusalem. Thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 8:20 in Kigali, 7:20 here in London. Presidential and parliamentary elections take place in Rwanda today. Paul Kagame is running for a fourth term, though he had to change the constitution to allow this. He's been perceived as the real leader of the East African country ever since July 1994. That's when his rebel army ousted the Hutu extremist government, which had orchestrated the genocide of that year. He's been president since 2000. The scale of his victory in 2017, when he got nearly 99% of the vote, along with his 95% in 2003 and 93% in 2010, raised some questions about how truly democratic the elections actually are. Well, I'm joined now by Michaela Wrong, who's a former Africa correspondent for Reuters and the Financial Times. She's the author of 5 books, including Do Not Disturb, the story of a political murder and an African regime gone bad about Rwanda. Michaela, many thanks for joining us. I believe you're in Italy as we speak. Some view Kagame as a visionary leader who stopped the genocide. Others see him as an oppressive despot. Is one view more prevalent than the other? Who is Kagame?
I think it's always quite hard to know what the view is within Rwanda, which actually should be what's interesting us as the nation goes to the polls. And it's really very hard to tell because, Rwanda isn't the kind of country where you can carry out opinion polls and where very few people, analysts have any trust in the actual outcome of the elections as being sort of free and fair. I think the man definitely has a vision. That's you could say. His vision has always been that he wants a strong country which has a lot of backing from the Western world in terms of development, and that has a sort of omnipresent military machinery, and that also imposes itself in a military way across Africa. But the other part of that vision also seems to be that he sees himself as running the country indefinitely. And I think the thing that I'm always very aware of as someone who writes about Rwanda is that he has presided over a system which has rewritten the past and imposed his narrative on the country of how his Rwandan Patriotic Front sees power, what was the build up to the genocide, the notion that all of the blood shedding and the massacres were conducted by the outgoing Hutu administration, that the RPF were this sort of white saviors that came in and ended the violence. Whereas, people who look back on the past and say, well, no, the RPF was one of the players and committed many atrocities and massacres of their own. So I think, part of his vision is definitely that he remains in place for the foreseeable future, running the country and imposing his story on how Rwanda got to where he is today, including the idea that he is this visionary leader and that without him, the country would implode.
Now, you mentioned his strong military presence across Africa. The US and the UN have in the past accused Rwanda of supporting the M23 rebel group in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Kagame's denied this. What has the M23 done and what do we know about Rwandan involvement?
It's very telling that this election is being staged just as the latest report, the periodic reports issued by a United Nations group of experts, and they just came out with a really damning report. They're always very embarrassing reports for Rwanda, because what they always highlight is the fact that Rwanda is the government, the state that is supporting the M23 rebel movement. That is currently, it's a Tutsi-dominated rebel group, largely Tutsis based in Congo, and it has seized over the last few years this huge swathe of territory in the Kivu, the area between Congo Rwanda, and is basically running that area as though it was the M23's fiefdom. And what the report just revealed was that this movement, there's always been allegations that the M23 were armed and taking orders and equipped by Rwanda, but the UN report confirms what everyone knew, which is that there are 4,000 Rwandan soldiers inside that part of Kivu. This really is a puppet military regime that Rwanda has imposed on Eastern Congo. This really is part of this whole vision where people are wondering increasingly, because this has now been going on for several years, whether or not Rwanda is intending to de facto annex that part of Congo, which is very rich in minerals. And we know that, Rwanda already is exporting smuggled gold, coltan, many of the minerals that are, now we need them to make our electrical vehicles and our laptops and our smartphones. So increasingly, we're seeing this confirmation of the fact that Rwanda seems to be spreading its wings beyond its actual borders. And that's a very worrying development, because on the one hand, Kagame likes to project himself as a stabilizing force, and his army is one of the policemen of Africa. But actually within the Great Lakes, his army is destabilizing all of his neighbouring countries.
So given all that you've told us about the current and historical situation in the country, why did the UK sign a bill earlier this year to send asylum seekers to Rwanda? I know it's been now reversed by the new Prime Minister, but it was a cornerstone policy for the Conservatives.
It really was, and I think they saw it as a silver bullet, and it just sort of sounded like a sort of, extraordinary idea that was innovative and sort of, let's just try this crazy idea, it might just work. And I think, the aim was, by telling asylum seekers that they would be sent to Rwanda and that have their claims processed in Rwanda, that the aim was to sort of strike fear into the hearts of anyone thinking of crossing, small boats crossing the channel. It was disputed through the polls, because actually a lot of people said, including a host of lawyers and NGOs who specialise in asylum, and the UNHCR itself, were saying this would mean you're violating the Refugee Convention, which Britain has signed up for. So Labour's, one of their first acts has been to scrap it. And I think what's really interesting is, this was a very expensive scheme. Rwanda has already received £250 million worth of pre-funding. It's already made clear it won't be returning that money. But the question now in the future is, does this mean an end to this very cosy relationship? Because basically the Conservatives stopped talking about the M23. They stopped talking about human rights abuses inside Rwanda. They stopped talking about the fact that Rwanda, has prevented, for example, the key opposition leader from running in these elections in the first place. All of that just got totally silent for the last, ever since that deal was signed in 2022 by Priti Patel. So the question now is whether this is a recalibration is going to take place between the UK, one of the key allies of Rwanda, and Kigali, and whether that signals a change. There is an increasing feeling, I think, internationally, that Rwanda is a rogue nation with the Great Lakes. The country, ironically, that says we can police Africa, we will send our peacekeepers around Africa for you, that really they are a rogue nation and that they need to be stopped. What they are doing in the Great Lakes really needs to be stopped by Rwanda's allies, who provide it with huge amounts of military and development aid.
The country votes today. We've talked about his record, near 100% in favour of him staying on, Kagame staying on. I mean, it seems a silly question to ask, but how democratic will these elections be, and is there a credible opposition?
Well, there were two opposition candidates, Frank Habineza and Philip Kayimana. In the last election, these gentlemen got only just over 1% of the vote. What Kagame did, and it is amazing to me because he really didn't need to do this, is well ahead of the vote. He made it impossible for Victoire Ingabire, who was a credible opposition candidate who might have got a significant following. She was told by a Rwandan court she couldn't run because she had been jailed by Kagame in her past, and therefore she had a conviction on her record and therefore was not entitled to run. If you ban the key opposition leaders from running against you, it's almost obvious who's going to win. I saw a rather amusing thing by the Human Rights Foundation, an NGO based in the US, and they were running a sweepstake on what kind of results Kagame is likely to announce. Because 98.79% of the vote was the last election result, and he's obviously going to be under pressure to show that he's done even better. And people are now betting 58% of people in this sweepstakes being run by this NGO were saying he's going to go for 100% this time. Which, if he does that, it just shows that the whole concept of democratic contest and the idea that there will always be someone who votes against you just as a sort of gesture of defiance, that simply hasn't been embraced. And that what you're seeing in Rwanda is a system which is basically a single party system, one man rule, cult of personality, presenting itself as a multi-party democratic system, but nobody's going to be fooled in future.
Michaela, thank you very much indeed. That's Michaela Wrong there. Now, still to come on the programme, we'll be reviewing the day's front pages. This is The Globalist, and here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a close ally of Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin, says that tensions have subsided at his country's border with Ukraine and extra troops deployed there are being sent back to their bases. Police in Nepal say there's no hope of finding any more survivors from the accident 3 days ago when two buses were swept away in a landslide. 55 people are still missing following the incident. Rescuers resumed their search of the site of Friday's crash about 86 kilometres west of the capital, Kathmandu. Peruvian former President Alberto Fujimori will run for the post again in the 2026 election. That's according to his daughter. Fujimori, who's 85 and suffers from health problems, was serving a 25-year prison term for human rights abuses when he was released from jail late last year. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 7:32 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin and I'm joined in the studio by Simon Brooke, who's a journalist and a communications consultant. And he has the papers with him. I do. The New York Times, Simon. Peter Baker is the journalist who's covered the past five presidents, very knowledgeable man on this subject. He is saying in the New York Times an assassination attempt that seems likely to tear America further apart.
Yeah, this is obviously across the world's media, a lot of analysis of the aftermath of this assassination attempt. And I thought this was particularly interesting because his piece, Peter Baker's piece, opens with a really striking contrast with the situation back in 1981 when President Ronald Reagan was shot. And he points out that the teary-eyed Democratic Speaker of the House, Thomas P. O'Neill Jr., went to the hospital room of the Republican president, held his hands, kissed his head, got on his knees to pray for him, which is just the most amazing contrast, as I say, with the current situation. The piece points out that currently today this latest act of political violence seems more likely to tear America further apart than to bring it together. Within minutes of the shooting, the air was filled with anger, bitterness, suspicion and recrimination, as of course we've seen. I think it's interesting, obviously, the Republicans immediately blamed the attack on the Democrats for labelling Trump as a proto-fascist who would destroy democracy. The piece is quite interesting, points out that officially the Trump campaign has been sort of relatively muted in their response. response. But then, of course, it really, they don't have to say much now, because this very much fits into the narrative that they've already, been laying out there of Trump as the victim. The deep state will do anything to prevent him from getting elected. And as the piece points out, even before this rally on Saturday, Trump had accused Democrats of seeking to have him shot by FBI agents or even executed for crimes that do not carry the death penalty. So it's sort of out there anyway, really, if you like.
Interestingly, it says the divisions have grown so stark that a poll in May found that 47% of Americans considered a second civil war likely or very likely in their lifetime.
Absolutely terrifying. It really is. And the piece, makes the sort of contrast, as others have, or the comparison, with the year 1968, where we saw sort of racial strife, we saw riots in the cities, we saw riots against US foreign policy, the assassinations of Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, and, as I say, protests against the Vietnam War. But this New York Times piece suggests that actually, even though that was a time of great conflict and strife, things perhaps weren't as potentially violent as they are at the moment. And it also, the paper points out, which I found really disturbing, perhaps you know this anyway, but just to see it laid out there, that Trump has repeatedly incited and praised acts of violence against all kinds of political opponents.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to Le Monde now. Of course, it was Bastille Day this weekend, calling for unity.
Let's talk about that.
But this is actually about Zelensky, President Zelensky of Ukraine, thanking Macron.
Yeah, absolutely. So a message, as you say, on the 14th of July, France's National Day. Congratulations to France, to President Macron and all the French on the occasion of their National Day. President Zelensky of Ukraine has wrote on X. And yeah, it's covered in Le Monde, as you say, and it just struck me, it must be really poignant for a country that's been invaded, brutally attacked, and is such peril, and actually, let's face it, could cease to be a country at any point, because that is Moscow's stated aim. And as I say, for one country to offer another country congratulations on that country's National Day, I think must be very emotional for Volodymyr Zelensky, certainly. The Le Monde is also coming back to the Trump thing as well. It's an interesting reported here that Moscow has suggested that the United States might want to review its inciting of hatred of political opponents and other people, which, I mean, that kind of sort of sick, ironic humour from Moscow, the idea of President Putin accusing American politicians, some of which have done things, are saying things which are certainly, to be criticised. But the idea that President Putin accusing people of stirring up hatred and the threats of violence is particularly sick. But yeah, a very emotional day, I'm sure, for President Zelensky, looking at France celebrating its National Day.
Simon, the news is so unrelentingly grim at the moment. One way to boost one's endorphins is to get out there and do some movement. And The Guardian is telling us all about how we can go and take K-pop dancing classes.
Yeah, absolutely. This Guardian piece was one of those pieces I read every now and then and think, gosh, I really must have a go at that, knowing that I absolutely never will. But I have to admit, I'm quite a closet fan of K-pop, even though I've probably just outed myself now, haven't I? But I'm not alone, apparently. This is a lovely story of a young woman, Xi Jingwang, who started this K-pop dance classes in Birmingham in the United Kingdom. She rented a small room to start with, but such is the demand that she now has her own studio and has about 10 classes a week. The paper reminds us, The Guardian reminds us, that K-pop is about slick, synchronized choreography, which, along with fashionable outfits and synthesized music, well, what's not to like with that? So paper goes along on a Thursday evening. There are 12 women in the studio, which I think interesting gender split there. But yeah, it's interesting. The paper also points out that this is actually part of a trend that K-pop is increasingly popular here in the UK. 17 became the first K-pop band to play Glastonbury. BTS headlining the Wembley Stadium in 2019. So yeah, I think in these dark times, something which is about fresh-faced young people dancing to light, upbeat music, as I say, what's not to like?
Exactly. Can I just give you a little recommendation? It's quite an old one. It's by a K-pop band called Taeyoon, and it's called 24/7, and it's sort of K-pop meets country and western.
Wow.
And they
as a Dolly Parton fan, I'm into that.
They do it with hay bales and all sorts. It's fabulous, absolutely fabulous.
Top tip, thank you.
Simon Brooke, thank you very much. It's 15:39 in Tokyo, that's 8:39 in Zurich. Now, Japan released its annual defence white paper on Friday. The minister responsible wrote in a preface to the report, "The existing order has been seriously challenged and we recognise that we are entering a new era of crisis." The challenges posed by the aggressive behaviour of China, North Korea and Russia have prompted Japan to push through dramatic changes in defence policy, including boosting budgets, as it loosens decades of post-war constraints that have long prevented it from playing a more robust role in East Asian security. Well, Alessio Patalano is a professor at King's College London and an expert on Asian defence. He joins me now. Alessio, lovely to have you back on the show. What's been the key driving factor behind Japan's push to beef up its defence capabilities?
Good morning, Georgina. I'll try very much and very hard to keep the positive and upbeat sort of atmosphere that you created in newspapers review this morning. But alas, it is again going back to the dramatic events of the war in Ukraine, which took place before Japan conducted a major review of its defence strategy, the national security strategy and the national defence strategy. So already in 2023, you had some really strong wording in a way that we'd never sort of seen before coming out of an official document such as the White Defence Paper. This year, it's building upon that original upgrading of an understanding of the crisis and tensions by adding on top of what's happening in Ukraine, also a lot more detail about concerns in Japan, serious concerns in Japan, about the Russia-North Korea ties and how these are playing to beefing up North Korean missile and nuclear capabilities, as well as what's been happening in the maritime spaces adjacent to Japan. So the usual sort of starting with East China Sea and the activities in the Senkaku Islands, the South China Sea and the activities in the second and around the second Thomas Shore, as well as Taiwan. So all in all, it's a grimmer version, if you want, of a story that already had been sort of started to take shape with the National Security Strategy of 2022 and the Defence White Paper of 2023.
What would a Chinese invasion of Taiwan mean for Japan?
So I think we need to be absolutely clear about the fact that whilst the wording is very strong, it is also very clear that the Japanese wording is crafted around the way in which the crisis around the Straits of Taiwan has been debated in the United States. And the paper makes consistent and significant reference to the fact that, from their perspective, China's behavior, it's a grave source of concern. But a lot of the details, when you look into sort of, you're paying attention to some of the wording in the White Defence Paper, there's lots of reference of the debate in the United States around Taiwan. And so in that sense, however, the Japanese understand that any sort of major type of crisis around the Straits of Taiwan would have direct consequences. You know, the last sort of islands of the Japanese archipelago, literally around 100 kilometers from Taiwan. On a clear sky day, you can actually see Taiwan. So it is impossible and inconceivable to think about a major crisis around the Straits of Taiwan without the Japanese being involved, in the sense that either Japanese, American bases in Japan being targets to be excluded to any possibility to contribute to address the challenge if the United States were to be involved into it, or indeed to keep the Japanese out of business. As in fact, since the bigger exercises in summer 2022, it's been the case through the splashes areas designated into the Japanese EEZ, when the Chinese military conducted major exercises on on simulated scenarios related to the Strait.
Japan's obviously had to change its post-war pacifist stance considerably. I wonder if all political parties are in agreement.
Like any mature democracy, you'll have very different positions about what Japanese defense should do or should not do. I think what we are starting to learn now is three things. First, that Japanese pacifism, as it's been sort of constructed and presented in the broader context, was never really as such. The Japanese people have always been much more realist about the challenges of their national defense and security, and above all, the ways to deal with it than the literature, if you want, on Japanese pacifism would ever believe. The second thing is also that people are starting to understand how different the context is, and that reflects into their choices for political support. So even Komeito, which is one of the minor sort of parties connected to the ruling party and the coalition in government in recent times, have changed their position and started to think more about what Japanese security should be about. The third thing is also that technology is allowing the Japanese to continue to have a very nuanced position by enhancing standoff capabilities, counter capabilities allow them to be very precise. So to remain true to the letter of the Constitution, if you want, without discounting the very important steps that need to be taken to improve defence.
Alessio, thank you very much indeed. That's Alessio Patalano there, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time to get the latest from the world of urbanism with Jessica Bridger, Monocle's contributing editor and an urbanism consultant who joins us from Baden in Switzerland. Jess, it's been forever. Very, very nice to speak to you again. I've never been to Baden. Give me a little snapshot of it.
It's lovely to speak to you, Georgina. It's a small city in Switzerland. It's about 15 minutes by train from Zurich, but has its own kind of rural pastoral edge to a city of about 23,000. And it's known for its hot water and thermal baths. And we've had a kind of revival of that over the last 3 or 4 years, which has brought new, fresh ideas to the city and how the city uses its public space.
Well, talking about baths, unfortunately, a horrible comparison to draw, but there has been terrible flooding there.
Yeah, Switzerland and a lot of the Alpine region has had unprecedented amounts of flooding, which has caused a lot of damage through flooding itself and also landslides, rock slides. When everything's wet, everything kind of wants to go with gravity. And there's been a lot of discussion about how to deal with that and how to plan for it, which I think has been an interesting development here. And some of that has been about how we treat the large rivers, such as the Aare, where there's been a lot of renaturalizing and renaturating. So letting rivers regain their floodplains, taking them out of that channeled condition that a lot of them have been in for the last 150 or so years.
I'd like to cross now to the other side of the world. Can you tell us about the new metro system in Sydney?
This is really an amazing thing. I mean, when we're talking about building big infrastructure, so whether that's for rivers or for people, metros are one of the biggest forms you can have. And Sydney opened its first metro line in 2019. In about 2 weeks, it's opening a major section which will run through downtown Sydney.
And when it's complete, there's going to be how many lines?
So there'll be 4 lines and about 45 stations. And what's really amazing about this is that the whole thing has come together in about 20 years. So the first real concrete proposal was in 2001. It lagged around till 2010, beset with a lot of problems, went back to the drawing board. And then the first operating line was 19. And what we should keep in mind is that building something in a city at a huge scale, at a citywide scale, is one kind of feat. And building something underground, requiring an immense amount of capital, multi-agency, multidisciplinary collaboration, is really an amazing thing to do in a contemporary city, and an example that a lot of cities should learn from. If you dream big and you put real agency, willpower, and funding behind it, you can accomplish unbelievable things.
Absolutely. And very quickly, tell us about Hamburg and some green plans.
So Hamburg has done something really interesting, which is taken some existing infrastructure, which is kind of has a sad history, the Flak Turm 4, which was a former gun tower defense bunker in the city. And it has a kind of checkered past. It was built with forced labor in World War II by the Nazis and became kind of a cultural hub over the last 20 years. And now it's been completely refitted with an additional 5 new floors and about 10,000 square meters, that's larger than a football pitch, of green and public space throughout the building, including a almost kilometer-long walkway, which goes from ground level all the way to the roof, where there's quite large public space.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Jessica, it was really lovely to speak to you again, and I'm sure we'll have some more news from you very soon. That was Jessica Bridger speaking to us from Baden in Switzerland. And you're listening to The Globalist. Italian cinema has, of course, always occupied a special place in the canon of film history. Fellini, Rossellini, Pasolini, and those are just the ones that rhyme. But after a few decades in the doldrums, Italian films are taking centre stage once more. And the Globo d'Oro, or Golden Globe Awards, like its American counterpart, though it should be said they're not affiliated, is now in its 64th edition. It showcases some of the best output of the cinephile nation. Monocle's Rome correspondent, David Pleasant, was at the ceremony that was held on Wednesday, the 3rd of July, in the gardens of the impressive Villa Massimo. Before the awards were announced, David, mic in hand, joined the excited crowds around the red carpet, where, exclusively for Monocle, he managed to get some insights on a film industry that not only is on the up, but is more inclusive and diverse than ever before. First, he spoke to Alina Trabottoni, who's a journalist and a member of the Foreign Press Association of Italy and the Globo d'Oro's joint artistic director, who began by telling him some of the big names present on the night.
We're seeing the likes of Garrone, we're seeing the likes of Cortellesi, we're seeing the likes of a whole series of brand new actors, directors, also female directors, which is new on the Italian scene, coming up on the forefront, and we're here to celebrate them tonight.
That's wonderful. So we're really seeing a renaissance, a second renaissance of Italian cinema. And what do you think this event, this particular, the Globo d'Oro, fits into all that? Like you've been heavily involved. What do you feel the role of this event that we're at tonight?
Well, we see our role as being one of actually promoting and showcasing and featuring Italian cinema across the world, because our jury, like the US Golden Globes, is made up of foreign correspondents. And interestingly enough, we all have very different viewpoints. So the actual outcome of our jury is very different from the local cinema prizes. And in essence, basically, we are here to select, pick, showcase, feature and tell the world about the magnificent productions that actually come out of Italy.
As you might have heard, Trabottoni mentioned 2 names. Matteo Garrone, director of Io Capitano, the star of which we'll be hearing from shortly, and Paola Cortellesi, actress and director of the 2023 film There's Still Tomorrow, which received critical acclaim and became one of the highest grossing films of all time in Italy. Exclusively for Monocle, I spoke to Paola as she stepped off the red carpet and asked her why she thinks her film was such a success internationally. Does she have a secret filmmaking recipe, I wondered?
Se ci fossero delle ricette magiche, There is never a magic recipe. Even when this film was released in Italy, I could never have imagined that it would have had such success abroad. I believe it is related to the film itself, to the audience's appreciation of the film, to how we told a tragic story in a way that comes naturally to me. This topic is something understandable by everyone, and that everyone knows in some way, even if only from a distance. I'm really proud that 45% of the audience was male, because we want men to walk alongside women, their partners and their daughters.
I also wanted to know whether Paola Cortellesi thinks that something of the quintessential Italianness that comes across so very powerfully in her film might have also been a key ingredient to its success abroad.
Perhaps I think it's a film that plays with the stylistic elements of neo-realism. It portrays to the world an Italy and a period that might not exactly be well known, but it is certainly well loved and very much in the imagination of people from many different countries. So I do believe that Italianness does indeed play a part. The subject matter is, unfortunately, something very well known and very much alive in many societies, not just ours. In the UK, the film was distributed by View and was very successful there as well, and that was a surprise for me. Then when I went to the cinema in London to present it, there was an incredible warmth.
Next up on the red carpet, I spoke to Trudy Styler, a legal alien, an Englishwoman in Italy. English actress, director and film producer, and also singer-songwriter Sting's wife of 40 years. By the way, he's also present here tonight. What does this country mean to you still after all these years, after all this time?
I think it means the same that it's always meant to me. I mean, I had an acting career in Cinecittà. I worked with Dante Spinotti, who did this film with me, Posso Entrare, but we did our first film together in 1987. So the level of artistry that, that comes out of Italy is unquantifiable, I think.
And if we could just talk about maybe cinema and film in general, have you kind of, do you feel that there's a bit of a revival going on in terms of Italian cinema, and is it fertile again after maybe something of a lull?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the movie There'll Always Be Tomorrow, it's such a winning film, starring an actress, directed by an actress. I think that there is a renaissance, as you call it, of film, but I think it's much more inclusive of women than it ever was. And that's very exciting.
Next up, leaving the red carpet, is Seydou Sarr, who at the age of just 19 has shot to fame very recently with the release of director Matteo Garone's film Io Capitano, where he plays the leading role in this heart-wrenching portrayal of two young migrants as they journey from their native Senegal across the Sahara and aboard a small boat bound for the Italian coast. Here, at this lavish event to promote Italian filmmaking, I asked him how this transformational experience has been for him thus far.
I can only talk about the experiences I've had because this is the first time I've done a film. My dream was to be a football player, but I made this film with Matteo Garone and I gained a lot of experience. This film is important for us for many reasons. It made me grow and learn about things I truly didn't know before.
I wanted to know what role Seydou thinks the film Io Capitano and European film in general could have in Senegal and Africa.
Matteo made this film to show you reality, what happens in the desert and on the sea. It's important for us, for our mothers, because there are many people who get on boats to come here to Europe and their mothers know nothing about it. And for this reason, when the film was released, we toured the villages of Senegal. It was intense and quite emotional, but it felt good.
Cinematic prowess with a revitalised energy, mainly thanks to a clutch of directors and actors that are consciously opening up the playing field, the Italian film industry seems set to take up its position on the world stage once more.
David Pleasant, many thanks. And that's all for today's programme. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.